The Trabant.
Hey guys, just killing time right now.
Make this movie scene look more communist.
Saivodu.
This, as you probably already know, is my Trabant. I've had it for 3 whole years now, so it's about time I tell you what's wrong with it, what I've had to fix, what it's like to own.
Everything.
General ownership and things like that. And I want to convey.
How many years ago was this video made?
Not just because they're interesting.
3 plus. So he had it for 7. So he has it for 7 years now, almost 8 years now it seems. He almost had the Trabant now for almost 10 years, I bet. 3 plus 5. So yeah, he has had it for a long time. But the thing is, though, guys, the channel's doing good. I'm doing great. Just wish I could do something right now, but eh. Right now I'm just staying here, relaxing, and that's about it. Right now I'm just going to relax, watch a little TV, and jump around with all the subscribers I have now. I know it's not many, but still, I got enough here to make me feel a lot better now about myself. But I'm just staying in here to kill the time. I might do some B-Stars tomorrow, or today, I'm not sure yet. By the time this recording comes out, who knows? As this recording, I'm on volume 8. Chapter, I finished up chapter 66. Right now I'm on volume 8 and finished up chapter 6.
Well, I didn't import it myself, so the story really isn't that interesting. I bought it off each.
Before I forget, right now this recording, when I was reading B-Stars at the time of this recording, I'm on chapter 67, I think. I just finished chapter 67, and it's volume 8 of the books. So we know.
From a Hungarian man named Adam Benko, seen here in an idyllic communist setting. He's imported several Trabants over the years simply because he likes them. Plus he's Hungarian, so that reduces the whole language barrier thing, which makes rounding up cars in Hungary quite a bit easier. This is also the reason my car has Hungarian plates on it, because the car came from Hungary, and when I got it, it still had the original license plate frames on it, so I bought a matching set of Hungarian plates of unknown origin off eBay, so I could utilize the existing license plate mounting hardware and to reflect the car's origin. And yes, my legal Missouri plates are just haphazardly tacked on afterward. They're zip-tied on the front, because priorities. Since the importation paperwork was already handled and it had a clean Florida title when I got it, I only had one tiny little hiccup when registering this car in Missouri. And that is, the VIN on this car is so short that it came up as a partial match for a stolen car in the Missouri titling system. Which meant that before I could get the car titled, I had to trailer this Trabant to the Missouri Highway Patrol inspection station so that they could verify that this is indeed not a stolen Ford Taurus. So what was wrong with this car when I first got it? First of all, it's a Trabant. It's always problematic. It also only had one functional headlight. It had a grabby front brake drum that made for really entertaining emergency stops, and it had an engine that liked to backfire and just not run well in general. And the best part about all of these problems, they were all present when the car passed its first safety inspection. It wasn't even running on both cylinders at the time.
One cylinder?
I have, of course, fixed a lot of these issues gradually over time. The first one I tackled was the engine, but we'll talk about that more in a second. Because a wheel cylinder in the right front brake drum was leaking, I replaced all of the brake cylinders and brake shoes throughout the car. After I fixed the brakes, I could stop without involuntarily turning right. When I got the car, the tires were a bit shot, so I had to get an entirely new set of tires for the car, and I got the cheapest tires I could find, because there's no sense spending big money on tires for a car that is made of cotton, weighs about 3 ounces, and has exactly 2 more horsepower than my lawnmower. I replaced the rubber boots for the drive shafts and the steering gear assembly because they'd either split or perished in some way. And that job was a bit of a nightmare. I want you to imagine stretching a traffic cone over a sharp flagpole without tearing it, and after coating your hands in copious amounts of butter. That's about how that job went. I took some rust preventative measures on the inner floor of the car. I didn't know what to expect when I pulled back the carpet, but what I found when I pulled back the carpet was actually almost no rust at all.
Really?
There was a little bit of surface rust towards the front and one single hole, but that was really it. What was weird is that nearly all of the paint covering the steel floor had or was currently peeling off. Most of it was peeling off to reveal bare steel underneath. It's as
Okay,
if
so that's
they
not
did
bad.
Proper paint prep procedures at the factory, which is unthinkable in a car with such exacting build quality standards as the Trabant. In the end, I removed as much of the rust and loose paint as possible, covered the entire floor with a nice coat of primer to prevent any further rust, and then covered the entire floor up back again with carpet. Speaking of rust, I bet you're wondering how much of it my moodily lit Trabant suffers from, because it is, after all, only the body panels that are made from recycled pants. All of the framing bits are still made from steel. I've had commenters in the past point to this little bit of rust here on the door sill as evidence, no, proof that my car is a complete bucket of rust underneath. But that's a bit like diagnosing someone with cancer just because they have a little bit of acne on their door sill. To really show you how much rust my car has, I need to go underneath it, or rather, have it go above me. As you can clearly see underneath here, my Trabant has about as much rust as a shark has eyebrows. Even the normal trouble spots are worry-free. Now this shocked me when I first looked, considering the incredibly weathered appearance of the paint, but thankfully the faded paint was a bit of a false alarm. The only rust at all down here is the little bit of surface rust on the door sill, a tiny amount of rust in the rear suspension arm, just one rear suspension arm, and the aforementioned tiny hole in the top of the floor, and a little bit of surface rust up there that I already cleaned up and primered over. I'm pretty sure this car suffered from more rust than that at one point because both front shock towers have been replaced, but that was someone else's problem. So yeah, rust is kein problem. There's a buzzard flying overhead. What's the car? Now, about that engine. This is a two-stroke air-cooled engine with gravity-fed fuel and no distributor. There's very little on it to go wrong, which makes it that much more infuriating when it does. When I first got the car, it wouldn't do a cold start without priming either the carburetor or the tops of the cylinders first. It refused to idle properly or maintain a steady idle. It seemed to run lean somewhat at random, and it had the nasty habit of backfiring through the intake, which, as you may be aware, is not where combustion is supposed to be taking place. To tackle this
backfires all the exhaust
problems, I ordered a multitude of parts. That's the beautiful thing about the Trabant. The parts are plentiful and cheap. I mean, they have to come all the way from Das Vaterland, but they're plentiful and cheap anyway. This allowed me to simply replace any part that looked like it was even thinking about showing the merest sign of going bad. I replaced the cylinders, the pistons, the piston rings, all the gaskets and seals that went with that. I replaced the carburetor with a brand new pre-tested, pre-tuned unit from Germany. I replaced all of the ignition components and then timed the ignition. Then after self-doubt set in, I re-timed the ignition. Then a year later, after self-doubt of my original self-doubt had set in, I re-timed the ignition a third time. And then I changed the fuel filter. So as you might be able to imagine, after all of that work, nothing changed. Cold starting, idling, backfiring, they're all still issues. Granted, some of the symptoms have changed slightly, but that's a bit like undergoing a massive craniotomy to discover that the dull ache you occasionally experienced in the small of the back on the left side is now gone. But the brain tumor is still there. After doing all of this work to end up with an engine that is seemingly just a little bit less dirty, I sort of gave up and I've just been dealing with it. I can manage the cold starting issue.
Okay, I got an idea what I try doing.
Annoying as that may be. I can manage the lean running and backfiring by just fiddling with the choke while I'm driving.
I might do that later on today. Might do a long video. Who knows?
Maintainability and fluctuating by just setting the idle a safe amount of too high. Now, obviously, none of this is ideal, and I've been putting these problems off for far too long. So I'm going to be tackling all of these issues in an exploratory full engine rebuild in an upcoming project series. Hang on a second. That's what I wrote in my original script, but just yesterday, a development happened, and not a good development. I noticed my Trabant recently has been running extraordinarily loudly. Now, I just passed it off because I assumed that one of the exhaust connections had wiggled itself free like has happened in the past. Oh boy, was I wrong. Because yesterday, when I was poking around the engine bay while the engine was running, I noticed exhaust coming out of the back of the cylinders. Both of them. Now, if you're not familiar with a Trabant cylinder, here is one of them. This is one of the old ones.
Upgrade your car with
You blew the cylinders. You blew the cylinder head. You blew a cylinder head.
fills your ride with sensational scents that will blow your mind. Plus, it stays fresh for over a month. Find your Febreze car.
Altoids are good, but they're expensive.
Altoids, curiously strong mints.
Yeah, they were
So
not.
check out the car.
Ooh, what a mint right now. I got mints right now. I
On
can
the
get.
front and some intake ports on the inside and on the sides here. On the back of the cylinder, on the back of a Trabant cylinder, there is no hole. Somehow the cylinders on my car have created new holes in the cylinders out the back. Now I have a guess as to how this happened, but how I didn't notice, I have no idea. But anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I had already planned to rebuild this engine, so I guess I'll just do it sooner. Because this engine is two-stroke, it can still run with these holes. It just has some new exhaust ports and some new intake ports, of which aren't supposed to be there. Again, I have no idea how I didn't notice this. But have you noticed in the previous shots my Trabant hasn't moved much? I'm trying to keep the whole driving thing to a minimum at this point. Ready for this? Yeah, I didn't set the idle that high. It's just running lean. That's problematic. I shut it off now. All that aside, after all the work I've done over the 3 years I've owned this car, are there still any unresolved issues? Aside from the engine, obviously. Well, yes, for starters, there's some electrical issues. The lights are all weaker than a diluted LaCroix. The warning lights only work on one side, which makes the blinkers very mad because that's their job. And just like when I bought it, there's still only one functional headlight right here. The other one may look like it's on, but that's just the parking bulb inside of it, which is coincidentally how it passed the safety inspection. The transmission also has an issue I'm told I should be worried about. Fourth gear occasionally stops transferring power to the wheels altogether. Probably something to do with the freewheeling device. Now I'm told this issue is only going to get worse until fourth gear stops working entirely. But I'm actively choosing to not worry about it until I have to. This is also the approach I'm taking with the electrical problems. Cleaning millions of ground sounds like no fun at all, so I'm just gonna not drive my Trabants at night. I think it's a pretty simple solution. Except for the blinkers. I need to do something about that, because that's a safety hazard. As if the rest of the car isn't. And now that
Do
you
hand
know
signals.
what I've done to this car, and in general, what's wrong with it, what are my future plans with this Trabant, aside from making the engine less holy? Well, before I tell you that, let me attempt to explain to you what owning this car has been like. I decided a long time ago that I
Do hand
own this
signals.
car for myself. I own it for everybody else. This is a terrible car with no real practical value, but every time I take it out in public, everyone looks at it and everyone loves it. It's the same with people of the internet. Everyone loves this thing. It's exactly like owning a Lamborghini, except the question, what do you do for a living, is replaced with, what is that thing? And I didn't have to spend Lamborghini money to get here. This car that was once a symbol of oppression for millions of people for decades now brings a smile to everyone that sees it. And I think that's wonderful. But back to the question, what are my future plans for this thing? Well, for starters, I want to make this car mechanically perfect. I don't drive it nearly enough as it is, and that's a real shame because that just reduces the number of opportunities anyone else gets to see it driving on the road. Plus, I like to drive it sometimes too. It's fun. And the main reason I don't drive it very often is because of the engine issues. I'm not very likely to go on a nice leisure cruise if before I even set off I have to take the spark plugs out of the top of the cylinders, douse some gas in there to prime it. It's just a hassle. And plus the engine has some holes in it in there now, so I want to get all of that sorted out. I've had some people in the past, mostly in person, ask me if I'm going to repaint this car because the paint that's on it is oxidized, dingy, and even missing in places. Well, no. I'm going to leave the paint exactly as it is. I like the, and here comes a buzzword, patina that this paint adds to the car. And I feel like repainting the car would be a misrepresentation of history on a car that is a big symbol from it. Now, I did consider buffing the paint, but the paint on this car is so thin that I'm afraid I would burn straight through it. So I'm going to leave the car exactly as it is in this dull shade of papyrus white, or as I like to call it, communist green. So that is, basically, a brief overview of my entire history with this car. Now, I'm sure I haven't answered all of your questions because some of the questions I've received are very specific, like, can I daily drive a Trabant in Marion, Kentucky? So if you have any questions for me or want to tell me it's capitalist propaganda machine, please do so in the comments down below. Also, if you have any suggestions for what you want to see me do with this Trabant after I get the engine all fixed up and deholified, let me know that as well. We've reached the end of the video now. Patreon, merchandise, you know the drill by now. Cut to the video out.